Hey guys, it's Robert with Hush Performance. We're back here with the EKK swap. Remember, this was a JDM K24, so we went over the water pump replacement with our RSX style, so we can use RSX power steering pump and AC pump. Well, the transmission was another thing. It's out of a 2013 Civic Si, and that one's kind of special because not a lot of people are working with it, and K-Tune came out with a brand new part, and that's so that we could use their K-Series race cables. They're fully adjustable, and there's a new bracket that just came out, which they were glad to send us, and we're excited to show you what that looks like. Fresh in from Canada. All right, they sent us a cool banner. That's cool. We're gonna have that flying in the shop soon, and this is our new bracket. Let's take it out. All right, here it is. Now, if you remember, this customer supplied their own parts, and they weren't sure what bracket they were gonna need for the 2013 Civic Si transmission. What is cool about them ordering the wrong part is that we can compare the differences between the current Z3 style. Side by side, you can see the differences between the two. Quite obvious. You can see there's a different offset and of course a different bolt pattern. And now, from my understanding, we're going to have to do a little bit of extra work, and that is going to be replacing the shift assembly here. All right, so the shift selector is going to be removed and then replaced with the RSX style. Fortunately for us, I have an RSX style shift selector here in stock. This might not be something that you would have readily available, but just keep in mind that the base model transmissions may be found in your local junkyard. The base model transmissions aren't as sought out after, of course, as the 6-speeds. Also, I believe that the all-wheel drive transmissions, well, the shift selectors would be the same, but how sad would that be to remove that out of a perfectly good all-wheel drive? Anyway, I have one. I have an entire transmission I could pull the shift selector out of, and I'm excited because then we get to put this on and get it running right away. With it removed, you can see the bolt pattern here, and now you can kind of see how it will match up with what's there. K-Tune bracket does come with its own hardware. It looks like what it includes is some spacers. I went ahead and put the original cable brackets back on the transmission so you can get a good idea, comparison on what that looks like. You can see there's an offset between this bolt here and the two in the back. These two look like they make up the difference. Alright, I went ahead and installed it. It was fairly simple. There's just 3 bolts that hold it. The top bolt here just goes in like how it looks, just straight in. Then the other 2, this one and then there's one behind, they both have this aluminum riser. Now what's next is swapping out the shifter selector. So here's our shift selectors of choice. This is going to be the RSX style base model. This right here is an all-wheel drive K-Series, and I just kind of wanted to show you a comparison. How the shift selectors is nearly identical. The whole back half of the transmission is nearly identical to the RSX style. This one is a base model. You can see there's no reverse lockout. This is what we're going to be swapping out. We're going to take this one off of here, but let's just take another closer look, real close look at the differences between the all-wheel drive, the RSX style, and they're like spot on. So that's good to know as far as when you need to swap casings. There may be internal differences between the two, and that's something that we're going to go a little bit further into as far as when we need to swap out parts or fix parts between all-wheel drive transmissions. And it would be nice to know that these may share the same part numbers, because these parts are looking like to be discontinued from Honda, at least the all-wheel drive stuff. So anyways, let's get this thing removed. So we did get the shifter out. That was as easy as they said it was. I think the hardest part of this job is having a spare one around. Okay, this is the newer style. I'm assuming that it's going to come off the same. I haven't removed one off of this transmission before, so it looks like it still has the 8mm Allen head key there, and then the 4 bolts on top that are 10mm. after a closer look, we can't just swap them over. I'm sure some of you guys out there know that. It's still a learning process for me. You know, everyone's got a story, and my story is I kind of missed the whole K-swap generation. Man, you know, you made some mistakes being a younger person, and I paid for them quite dearly. And I've kind of been out of the swap scene for the last 7 years, and I'm back. But in that time, we totally lost connection with any of the K-swap stuff and all the information that's going out there. We were one of the first K-swaps that happened in Southern Arizona. We did a Type R EG in 2005. It was relatively new and very expensive at the time. One of my friends had a good job, and we swapped it for him and drove around quite a bit. And then everything kind of went down, and now we're back in the game. So I'm kind of rediscovering the K-swap world. Really cool because I've kind of accelerated really fast because swapping is what I used to do, and it's essentially the same thing. Looking closely at here, you see differences between the 6th gear and reverse lockout and the non. And of course, then the shifter itself is completely different as well. So we are going to have to source us a Type S shift selector to finish this up. Alright guys, we are back. We have a couple of parts we were able to get pretty quick. Fortunately, the owner of the vehicle has some friends that have some parts, and he was able to get the stuff that we needed very fast. We did end up finding an RSX style shift selector. Also, we can now get this engine mounted properly. We didn't have the proper mount here on the side at the time. We have one. One of our friends had one laying around, and he let us get it. Normally, they do not come anodized like you'll see here. This right here is the brand new patented part by Hotsport. This will fit both K20 and K24 blocks. Next to it is our shift selector out of the RSX. Not as pretty as the one that we took out. We'll just clean this up a bit before we put it in place. All right, there it is. We got it cleaned up a little bit. It's a little better than what it was, and we're gonna go ahead and put this in. Now, this does get sealed with some Honda Bond around here. I have some ultra gray that we're gonna use. The bolt pattern is a bit different on this shift selector versus the RSX style. Most of them line up. Actually, all of them line up. All right, so we're essentially working with 4 different bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Except they're slightly in a different spot. Also, the dowels are in a different spot. So the provisions are there for the bolt pattern. We're going to be using this hole here and this hole here, but they are not tapped. That means we're gonna have to drill and tap these to the correct size, which is going to be a 6mm by 1.0. There it is. It was relatively painless, just like they said. I don't think you need to be a transmission repair specialist to be able to swap that out. You can hear the gears is changing just fine. Now, if we look closely, if you could see through the shadow, you can see the original bolt pattern, but the flange on the casing is deep enough to where the flange on the shift selector will still cover it. I guess to finish up this section, this was so that we could use their standard RSX style shift cables, the race style cables, along with their really cool billet aluminum RSX style shifter. Their race cables are fully adjustable, so we can adjust them at the ends and we can bring them further back or further in based on what we need. All right, now that the transmission section's done, the next part we're going to install is the UKBB. This is the part I was explaining to you earlier. That is the patented part from Hotsport. This is a universal engine mount bracket. It mounts right here on the side of the engine. So taking a closer look at this, you can see how there's a two-step, and so what happens is there's a height difference between the K20 and the K24 block. The bottom bolt is a slider,
depending on which bolt holes you use, start on the bottom and it could slide up. Before we bolt it directly on, we have to remember that there's this spacer here, and the spacer goes right back here, and that's to clear the sensor there. Now that the UKBB is installed, now we can go ahead and put our motor mount and hang this engine correctly. Alright, now that our mounts are in place, now we can see why we're going to need to swap over to an EG subframe. We're keeping power steering in this car, and here is the SI OEM rear crossmember. It consumes a lot of space, but also this type of transmission, the differential casing is rather large as well. Passenger mount in place, you'll see where it needs to be and then where the bracket is, and it needs to push over that much more. Back here you can kind of see the interference there. This right here is the Hossport EK-K5 mount kit. This rear billet aluminum bracket will work on an EG rear subframe. I'm going to pull a power steering subframe out of an EG that I have here. It's a little EX. This is one I purchased from some friends of mine a while back. It has power steering, and we'll do a side-by-side comparison between the two so you can see how the EG is shaped versus the EK. Hey guys, it's Robert with Hush Performance. Today I'm here with Art. He's the one who owns the blue hatch. Finally get to meet him for the first time. He's over here working on the EG. Okay, so today we're still working on the EK project. The EK K5 kit works with the EK rear crossmember. It fits, but apparently the transmission doesn't fit with the crossmember on the EK. So we just wanted to really go and test that. We wanted to make sure if that was true, and we kind of found the places that it could be an issue. So really what you need to do is swap to an EG rear crossmember, and we were just trying to do our best to avoid having to do that. Here the EG subframe holds the lower control arm, but it exposes the steering rack. Whereas the EK, the subframe comes and covers the steering rack, and that's what kind of is hindering the fit of the transmission. Alright, so to start, we're going to take this whole knuckle off. We're not going to use that, and we're going to take off the strut. We don't need that either. We're going to keep the tie rod on. We're just going to pop it off and leave it connected. Alright, with Art's help, we got the crossmember off. We're going to hose it down, and we're going to do a quick comparison of the two. Alright, now that we have the EG crossmember out, we have the EK up and ready to work on. Now this is going to be the second time we pulled this engine out. Yesterday, Art and I, we pulled it out because we thought we could just notch the rear crossmember on this to clear. Turns out we notched it in the wrong spot and the transmission still doesn't fit, but it was very, very close. I took a take just before this one, and I was able to show how close the transmission it was, and then I noticed that the microphone wasn't on, and now I don't have any audio. But we're gonna go ahead and pull this out again, and then we'll be able to show you up close about where we're gonna notch it when we get it out and compare it to the EG. That's our notching. We cut this whole hump out. Let's see if you could see. So there was a hump here, and that's kind of what seemed to prevent it, and then we kind of beat it in. I backfilled it with some steel, but we did it in the wrong spot. It needed to be over just a little bit more right here. So as you can see, this crossmember covers the steering rack, whereas on the EG right here, it's exposed. And so this is the area that we're kind of concerned with. So on the EK, it kind of comes out like this and kind of takes up a whole bunch of room. So ideally, what we're thinking of doing is kind of cutting it back, the EK, cutting it in like this, and then maybe filling it up, you know, to kind of fill in the space. It is common on the EFs to beat in the frame rail, and that's okay. We did that to clear the alternator. It doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the suspension, but unfortunately this is connected to that suspension. So beating it in, would that change the geometry of the alignment? Possibly. So that's why we decided to cut it back. Now again, like we were talking about, this is possibly a weld-in ordeal. Maybe that's not for you, but we're gonna try it because I'd prefer to keep
the OEM parts on the car. That way it's easier for our customer. Later on, if he needs to swap out suspension components, he'll know what to get them for, and it's not as confusing. Now with the Crossmember underneath, you can really see the differences here, and you can see right there how much more clearance there is for the transmission than there is here. Let's see if we can get like an above angle. There you can see how it kind of dips in just enough. And we're going to attempt to do this with the EK. I'd really like to see if that would just work out. And I think what we're going to do is notch it out right where we need. We'll be able to use the EG as comparison, and of course, we were smart enough to mark the Crossmember this time to know where to start cut and make our angle. We'll maybe put some angle plate in there to backfill it. That way we keep the strength of the subframe. So here are the power steering inlets and outlets for on the EG. And then we'll look over here on the EK. They're on the side, they're not up front. So would that mean that we'd have to make our own lines too, or rebend those? That's just another step that maybe someone doesn't want to take, especially when they want to use power steering. Now we do have a hybrid power steering kit in this, and I haven't used it yet, so I'm not quite sure what gets replaced on that. I guess we'll just cross that path when we get there. I'm just really curious to see how we can get the EK to function and work on this without having to swap any of that out. In my opinion, like I said, would be much easier. Okay, now we're in the bay, we're getting ready to cut. This is kind of what we were working on yesterday, and it wasn't enough. And there's like a cage that's back behind there. It kind of houses this lower control arm, and it strengthens that. So on the EG, you can see where it starts, right about here. On the EK, like I would assume at first we would just cut. We cut straight back and then kind of up this flat area so we could put a piece of angle iron in there. But feeling back here, the cage kind of starts right about ends and starts right about this point, right here at that grind mark. So we could, what we're thinking about now is cutting it straight back in. We'll put a 90-degree angle in there for our plate. Alright, so we have it notched now, but you know, this is pretty structural, and you can see the cage that I was kind of referring to that houses the lower control arm. You know, will this affect the rigidity and strength of the Crossmember? Perhaps. That's why I would like to set in a piece of angle here. At least maybe flat and kind of maybe build this back in, you know, to strengthen it. But, you know, it really just kind of covers the steering rack here. We didn't cut into this bolt. I just kind of left that out because still trying to figure out how this works. It looks like maybe the steering rack is attached to something else that bolts behind it. Does it give us all the room? It looks like it would. Wouldn't know until we get it in there. We found our piece of steel, our little scrap steel that we found. It looks like it fits very well. We need to get all this paint material off so it will weld really clean. We already sandblasted our little piece of flat steel. We're going to kind of fit it in there, and the angle fits very well. I'm really happy with it. You can see that there's some material that hangs over, but we're just going to cut that off, and then we're going to add it in that little sliver. I think this is going to fit very well. Alright, that's our initial plate. It's welded in. The hangover, like right here, we're gonna trim off. And again, this was just a piece of scrap steel that we had. So we'll use the rest of it to kind of fill in this gap here.
Let me get dirtier.
Hold on. Okay, so we finished up welding. I would say I finished up my part, and then Art had to go and fix it.
Yeah, because Robert doesn't know how to weld, and I don't either, but I can grind pretty good, so. Yeah,
so it came out pretty good. I'm really impressed with how it came out. Very shiny. He said that it probably wouldn't come out because it would just be reflecting. But that is the finished product of the plates that we added.
And we backed it up too. Geez, can you even see it? It's tough to see, but we fully boxed it in. We're really happy with how it came out. We went over it with the flap disc, went over it with some 220 and then some 600, and it came out pretty good. So to finish this off, I'm gonna put some paint thinner around the whole area to clean it off, and we're gonna spray it with this one right here is the flat black. We're gonna try to match the color of the rear cross member, and I think this will work out. All right, it's the moment of truth. We're ready to drop the engine back into place. This is number 3. It came out really good. I'm very excited to show you. I think that's pretty rad, man. I'm pretty excited about that. It only took all day to do, so there's that. We had lunch with Brian Gillespie of Hossport this afternoon at the good old Taco, no, it was Del Taco. Yeah, and it wasn't even Tuesday, so that was kind of weird. But he got a burrito, and he didn't even get a taco. But anyways, we told him about what we were doing, and he said that's something that he thought about making in due time. I was explaining to him exactly what was going on with the SI and how that rear cross member kind of just covers the steering rack, and it's like an empty void back behind there, and he thought that could be a cool little part to produce. Much easier for him to do than I, just because they have the laser and they just cut it out, whip them out, and that become a product. All right, there's the notch that we made down there. And then you see we just missed the drain plug. Very hard to see from when the engine's not in place. And we can't get the engine in place because the transmission just kind of hits everything on the way down and we get stuck. And well, I guess we could try to box cut it again. We're gonna go underneath the car to see what's left there that we can still cut out without interfering too much with the control arm bolt. And if we have to, I guess we're just gonna go EG. We'll see. All right, so next morning we did get a little bit frustrated yesterday. We did all that work on the rear cross member and it looked like it didn't have any clearance. Well, we shifted the engine in right, we got the motor mount in, and it seemed to clear well. Let's take a look.